The little girl held the iron gate with both hands like she had walked 1,000 miles just to reach it. Her fingers were dirty. Her dress was torn at the knee. A small tin box hung from a rope over her shoulder. She looked up at the man standing inside the fence and did not move. "Is this where Elijah Cole lives?" she asked. Elijah had been fixing a broken saddle. The leather slipped from his hands. He looked at the child and frowned. "Who's asking?" The girl did not blink. Lydia's daughter. Everything inside him stopped. The saddle hit the ground. His hands stayed empty. He looked at her face. Brown eyes, dark hair, a scar over one eyebrow. 8 years old, maybe. Too young to know that name. Too young to stand at his gate like she belonged there. He stepped closer. "What did you say?" "I said I'm Lydia's daughter." Elijah grabbed the gate. "Lydia died." "I know. 20 years ago." "I know that too." The road behind her creaked. A horse shifted its feet. Elijah looked up. The sheriff sat in the saddle watching them. His hat covered half his face. One hand rested on the horn of the saddle. The other stayed close to his pistol. "You know her?" the sheriff asked. Elijah kept staring at the girl. "I know that name." The sheriff looked at the child. "Girl, you got family?" "No." "You got somewhere to go?" "Not after this." Elijah opened the gate. The sheriff did not smile. "Careful, Elijah." Elijah ignored him. "What's your name?" The girl shook her head. "Later. Who brought you here?" "I walked." "From where?" "Far enough." Elijah looked at her boots. One was split open. Her hands were scratched. She looked hungry. "Come inside," he said. "I can cook something." "No, you need food. I came for the truth." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Send her away." The girl looked at him. "No." The sheriff's jaw tightened. Elijah noticed it. He noticed the way the sheriff kept looking at the little tin box hanging from her shoulder. "What's in the box?" Elijah asked. "Things my mother left me." "Your mother?" "Lydia." Elijah felt the old wound open. 20 years. 20 years since she disappeared. 20 years since people found blood by the river and said she was dead. 20 years since he buried an empty coffin because there was nothing else to bury. The sheriff climbed down from his horse. "Enough of this." The girl stepped behind Elijah. "Don't let him touch me." Elijah looked at the sheriff. "You got business here? This child is lying." "How do you know?" "Because Lydia never had a child." The little girl laughed. It was soft. "You sound scared. Watch your mouth. You're scared of my box." The sheriff took one step forward. Elijah moved between them. "Leave it." "Elijah, leave it." The sheriff backed away, but his eyes stayed on the tin box. Elijah led the girl to the porch. She sat down without a word. He brought out bread and a cup of water. She pushed both away. "Eat." "No." "Why?" "Truth first." Elijah sat across from her. "You ask strange things for a child. People stopped treating me like one a long time ago." The sheriff stayed near the gate, watching, waiting. Elijah pointed at the box. "Open it!" The girl untied the rope and set the box on the porch. It was old. Rust covered the corners. She lifted the lid. Inside was an old photograph. Elijah picked it up. His fingers shook. Lydia stood in the picture. Young, smiling, the same smile he had carried in his head for 20 years. Beside the picture sat a silver button. Elijah knew it too. It had come from his old work shirt. He had lost it one summer afternoon. Lydia laughed about it for days. Under the button lay a folded letter. At the bottom rested a broken sheriff's badge split down the middle. Elijah looked at the sheriff standing by the gate. The man's face had turned white. "Where did you get this?" Elijah asked. "My mother gave it to me." "When?" "Before she died." The sheriff took another step. "Give me that box." The girl closed the lid. "No, girl, no." Elijah stood up. "Why do you want it?" "Because it belongs to the law. Looks broken to me." "Elijah, hand it over." "No." The sheriff looked around the yard. There was nobody else. Just the three of them. His voice dropped. "You don't know what you're holding." The girl looked up at him. "I think you do." The sheriff climbed back onto his horse. "Send her away before dark." Elijah folded his arms. "Go home." The sheriff pulled the reins. "You'll wish you listened." He rode down the road without looking back. The little girl waited until he disappeared. Then she pushed the tin box toward Elijah. "Open the letter." "Why me?" "Because she wrote it for you." Elijah looked at the paper. His hands would not work. The girl nodded toward it. She said you would be afraid. Elijah slowly unfolded the letter. One line stared back at him. He knew the writing before he read the words. He had watched Lydia write his name 100 times. His throat closed. His hands started shaking. The little girl watched him without speaking. Elijah looked from the letter to the child and back again. His voice was barely there when he finally spoke. She should never have known my name. Elijah stared at the letter in his shaking hands. The little girl sat across from him on the porch with the old tin box at her feet. The sheriff had not ridden far. His horse stood by the gate, and the man watched them like a wolf waiting for a door to open. The paper felt old and thin. Elijah could still see Lydia's hand in every line she had written. The girl looked at him without fear. "Read it," Elijah swallowed. "You know what's inside? My mother told me enough. Then tell me." "No." "Why?" "Because she wanted you to read it." Elijah unfolded the paper. His eyes moved slowly over the first lines. Lydia had written that she was hiding. She had written that men with badges and men with money had joined hands. She had written that women were disappearing. Babies were disappearing with them. Elijah frowned and read again. His voice turned rough. "Stolen babies." The girl nodded. Elijah kept reading. Missing mothers, hidden graves, families paid to stay quiet, sheriffs who looked away, rich men who gave orders. Lydia had written every name she knew. Some were crossed out, some were not. Elijah stopped breathing when he reached the last part. She had written one sentence twice, "Trust nobody wearing a badge." The sheriff took a step toward the porch. "Give me that letter." Elijah folded it. "No. It belongs to the law. Looks like the law is hiding something." "Elijah, stay where you are." The sheriff climbed the steps. The little girl stood up. She picked up her tin box and held it close. The sheriff reached toward her. Elijah moved between them so fast the chair behind him crashed onto the porch floor. "Touch her and lose your hand." The sheriff froze. "You're making a mistake, maybe. That child is dangerous." The girl laughed. "I'm 8. You don't know what she had him." "Do you?" The sheriff looked away. That scared Elijah more than anything. The little girl stepped beside him. Her voice was small. "My mother said you'd protect me." Elijah closed his eyes. Lydia's face came back. Her smile, her laugh, the day she vanished, the empty coffin. 20 years of anger, 20 years of blame. He looked at the child. "I failed her once. Will you fail me?" "No." The sheriff shook his head. "You're choosing the wrong side." Elijah folded the letter and slipped it into his pocket. "Go home. You think this ends here? Go home." The sheriff looked at the girl one last time. "You'll regret this." He climbed onto his horse. The animal turned slowly. The sheriff rode away, but he kept looking over his shoulder until the road bent out of sight. Elijah stayed still until the sound of hoofbeats faded. The little girl sat back down. "He's scared." Elijah looked toward the road. "I noticed." "Good. Why good? Scared people make mistakes." Elijah looked at her harder than before. She did not sound like a child. She sounded like somebody much older. He sat beside her. "How long were you with your mother?" "Not long." "Who raised you?" "Different people." "Family?" "No." "Friends?" "No." "Who?" She looked down at the tin box. "People who didn't want me." Elijah wanted to ask more. He could not. The letter felt heavy inside his pocket. The little girl reached for the bread he had offered earlier. She broke off a piece and ate it without a word. Elijah smiled a little. "Hungry after all?" "A little." He handed her the cup of water. She drank slowly. Her sleeve slipped down her arm. Elijah saw a dark mark on her wrist. His smile vanished. He reached for her hand. "Hold still." She looked at him. "Why?" "Please." She let him turn her arm over. The mark looked like an old birthmark. A small shape, almost like a crooked star. Elijah felt cold. Lydia had the same mark. He had kissed that wrist once. He had traced that little shape with his finger while she laughed at him. The girl pulled her hand back. "What's wrong?" Elijah could barely answer. "Your mother had that mark." "I know. How?" "She showed me." Elijah stood up and walked across the yard. His head hurt. Lydia was dead. She had to be. Everyone knew it. Everyone said so. But the child knew too much. The letter knew too much. The mark should not exist. He looked toward the road. The sheriff was gone. He looked back at the girl. She watched him quietly. "You think I'm lying?" she asked. Elijah shook his head. I don't know what to think. Good. Why? The truth starts there. The sun dropped lower. Long shadows crossed the yard. Elijah picked up the tin box. Come inside. The girl stood, but stopped at the porch steps. I know. You'll sleep in the spare room. She shook her head. I don't sleep inside. Why not? Walls make it hard to hear. Elijah frowned. She looked past him, past the house, past the old barn. Her eyes stopped at the stone well standing alone near the edge of the yard. The rope hanging over it moved a little, though the air was still. Elijah looked at the well and then back at her. There's nothing there. The little girl started walking toward it. Elijah followed. She stopped a few feet away and stared into the darkness below. Neither of them spoke. The old rope creaked once. Elijah felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. What are you looking at? He asked. The little girl never looked away from the well. Her voice was quiet when she answered, Something down there knows me. The little girl stood beside the old well without moving. Elijah stayed a few steps behind her. The rope hanging over the dark hole turned slowly. He looked for wind and found none. His hand drifted toward the pistol on his belt. The girl kept staring into the black water below. You hear them? She asked. Elijah frowned. No. She nodded like she expected that answer. You will. Elijah walked to the edge and looked down. The stone walls of the well disappeared into darkness. He could hear water somewhere far below. Nothing else. He stepped back. There's nobody there. They don't talk all the time. Who? The ones waiting. Elijah looked at the child. Waiting for what? For someone to listen. The old rope creaked. The wooden bucket hanging from it swayed a little. Elijah grabbed it to stop the sound. The rough wood felt cold in his hands. He let go quickly. The girl watched him. You heard that. It was the rope. No, Elijah did not answer. He looked across the yard toward the house. Everything looked normal. The barn stood quiet. The horses rested in the fence line. The road was empty. He looked back at the well. The rope moved again. A soft sound drifted out of the darkness. It could have been water. It could have been something else. The girl walked around the well. Her fingers touched the old stones. Come here, she said. Elijah moved closer. She pointed at the rock. Small marks had been cut into it years ago. Dirt covered most of them. Elijah brushed the dust away with his hand. Letters appeared. Names. One after another. Some were hard to read. Some had almost disappeared. He read the first one. Then another. Then another. His face turned pale. Near the bottom, he found a name that made his knees weak. Lydia. Elijah touched the carving. His fingers shook. No. The girl looked at him. You know that one. Who did this? I don't know. Elijah cleaned away more dirt. More names waited under the mud. Men, women, children. Some he remembered. Some had vanished years ago without a trace. Some had simply packed up and left, or that was what people believed. The girl looked at the long list. Who buried them? Elijah opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked toward the road. He looked at the house. He looked at the well. He could not answer. Hoofbeats broke the silence. 3 riders came through the gate without asking. Dark coats, clean horses, hard faces. Elijah stepped in front of the girl. The tallest rider climbed down. You Elijah Cole? Who's asking? The governor. Elijah waited. The man pointed at the little girl. We came for her. The child stepped closer to Elijah. No. The rider looked at her. You don't get a choice. Elijah folded his arms. Neither do you. The second rider smiled. I heard you. Then hand her over. Elijah shook his head. Not happening. The first rider sighed. This doesn't have to end badly. Elijah looked at the pistol hanging from the man's belt. Then leave. The rider pulled the gun halfway out. Elijah moved in front of the girl. Try it. The yard turned quiet. The horses shifted their feet. Nobody breathed. The little girl looked at the men. They're scared. Elijah kept his eyes on the pistol. Of what? Me? One of the riders laughed. Little girl, nobody fears you. She looked at him. Then why did 3 of you come? The laughter stopped. Elijah noticed it. So did the men. The first rider pulled his gun all the way free. Elijah reached for his own weapon. The girl touched his arm. Don't. Stay behind me. They won't shoot. How do you know? Because they need me alive. The first rider lowered his pistol a little. His face looked angry now. The governor said to bring the child. Elijah pulled his gun. Tell the governor to come himself. The riders looked at each other. None of them moved. Finally, the leader slid his pistol back into the holster. You'll get your chance to say that. Elijah stayed ready. Leave. The rider climbed back onto his horse. The governor doesn't like being told no. I don't care. The rider pointed at the little girl. She belongs to him. The girl laughed again. Nobody owns me. The riders turned their horses. Before leaving, the leader looked back. This is your warning. Elijah watched them ride away until the dust settled. Then he lowered his gun. The little girl looked up at him. You should get your rifle. Elijah frowned. Why? They're coming back. How many? More. Elijah walked to the porch and grabbed the old rifle leaning against the wall. He checked the bullets. His hands stayed steady. When he turned around, the girl was standing beside the well again. She bent down and picked up a small stone. Elijah walked toward her. What are you doing, listening? There's nothing there. You're wrong. She held the stone over the dark opening. Elijah looked into the well one more time. He saw only darkness. The girl let the stone fall. They waited. No splash came. Seconds passed. The rope stopped moving. The horses in the field lifted their heads. Even the birds went quiet. Elijah gripped the rifle tighter. Then something came from the darkness below. It was soft, barely a whisper. It sounded far away and close at the same time. One word climbed out of the well and into the empty yard. Papa! Elijah stepped backward. The rifle almost slipped from his hands. The little girl stayed by the well and listened to the darkness. Neither of them spoke. The single word still hung in the yard. Papa! Elijah looked at the child. Did you hear it? Yes. Who said it? I told you something down there knows me. Elijah forced himself back to the edge. He pointed the rifle into the well. Come out. Nothing answered. The rope moved again. The bucket knocked against the stone wall. Elijah lowered the gun. Get away from this place. No, that's not a request. Look down. Elijah looked. The first light of morning touched the inside wall. Something white rested between the stones. He tied the rope around a post. Stay here. Be careful. Elijah climbed into the well. His boots scraped the old rocks. The air smelled old and wet. He reached the white shape and pulled. A bone came loose. He froze. It was an arm. He dug with his hands. More bones appeared. A skull, small ribs, tiny fingers. Elijah climbed out carrying the little skeleton. The girl looked at it without tears. They hid us. Elijah could not speak. He climbed down again. There were more bones, bigger ones. Old coats, rusted buckles, 3 broken sheriff badges. He placed them on the ground. The sun climbed higher. Hoofbeats came down the road. The sheriff returned. He stopped when he saw the bones. His face lost its color. Cover it. Elijah stood. No, put them back. No, you don't understand. Then explain. The sheriff climbed off his horse. Those people are dead. Elijah pointed at the child bones. They mattered. Leave it alone. Who put them there? Leave it alone. The little girl looked at the sheriff. You knew. Quiet. You knew. The sheriff reached for her arm. Elijah grabbed his wrist. Touch her and lose the hand. The sheriff shoved him. Elijah shoved back. The sheriff swung first. His fist hit Elijah across the mouth. Elijah dropped the rifle and hit him harder. Both men crashed into the dirt. The sheriff reached for his pistol. Elijah caught his arm. They rolled across the yard. The little girl picked up the gun and pointed it at the sheriff. Stop! Both men froze. Elijah stood. He grabbed the badge from the sheriff's chest and pulled. The metal snapped free. He threw it beside the broken badges from the well. You don't deserve it. The sheriff wiped blood from his face. You fool! A wagon rolled through the gate. An old preacher climbed down. He looked at the bones and took off his hat. God saw it. The sheriff laughed without joy. So did you. The preacher closed his eyes. I know. You stood there. I know. You blessed their lies. I know. Elijah looked at the old man. Tell me. The preacher shook his head. I was afraid. Of who? Men with money, men with badges, men who buried truth. The little girl walked to him. Did my mother come here? The preacher looked at her face. Tears filled his eyes. Yes. Did my mother scream? The old man opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The sheriff looked away. Elijah looked at the ground. Nobody answered. The girl nodded once. I thought so. The preacher dropped to his knees. I should have spoken. Elijah looked at the bones. Who else knew? Too many. Who gave the orders? I cannot say. You can. If I do, more people die. Elijah picked up one of the child bones. His hands shook. They already did. The preacher bowed his head. The sheriff backed toward his horse. Elijah noticed. Don't move. This is bigger than you. Maybe. You can't fight them. Elijah looked at the girl. She stood beside the well with the old tin box. I have to try. The sheriff climbed onto his horse. You're making a war. Elijah picked up the broken badge. Looks like it started before I knew. The little girl came to his side. Elijah looked at her. I promise justice. She shook her head. Promise better. Elijah looked at the bones again. He nodded. I promise the truth. The preacher stood slowly. He walked to the edge of the well and stared down. There are more, he said. Elijah looked at him. How many? I stopped counting. Children, mothers, men who asked questions. The little girl held the preacher's hand. Did anybody save them? The old man cried. No. Elijah loaded his rifle. Then somebody starts today. The sheriff pulled his reins tight. You still have time to walk away. Elijah looked across the yard at the uncovered bones and the broken badges lying in the dirt. Not anymore. The sheriff turned his horse and rode away. 2 riders waiting on the road joined him. None of them looked back. The preacher watched them leave. They are going to the governor. Elijah picked up his rifle. The little girl closed the tin box. Far down the road, the 3 riders hurried through the dust carrying news to the governor. The 3 riders disappeared into the dust. Elijah stood in the yard with the rifle hanging at his side. The old preacher watched the road until the last shadow was gone. The little girl sat beside the well with the tin box in her lap. The bones still rested on the ground where Elijah had placed them. Nobody spoke for a long time. The preacher finally took a slow breath. They'll bring the governor. Elijah looked at him. Good. You don't mean that. I do. You'll die. Elijah looked at the little girl. Not before I hear the truth. The preacher lowered his head. Then ask. Elijah pointed at the bones. Who put them there? Men with power. Names. Later. Now. The preacher looked at the child. She deserves to hear it too. The little heard worse. The old man sat on the porch steps. His hands shook. Lydia didn't die by the river. Elijah felt the world stop. Don't done lying. They found blood, not enough to kill her. They found her horse. She let it go. Elijah took 1 step closer. She lived? Yes. How long? Long enough. Elijah grabbed the preacher's shirt. Tell me. She came to me that night. Elijah let go. The preacher looked at the little girl. She was carrying a baby. Elijah stared at him. No, yes. You're lying. I buried enough lies. The little girl stayed quiet. Her hands rested on the tin box. Elijah looked at her and then back at the preacher. Whose child? The preacher did not answer. Elijah shouted, Whose child? Yours. Elijah stumbled backward. The rifle slipped from his hand and hit the dirt. He looked at the girl, brown eyes, dark hair, the little mark on her wrist, Lydia's smile hiding in her face. The little girl looked back at him. I knew. Elijah could not breathe. You knew? Mama told me. She told you I was your father? She said my father was a good man. Elijah covered his face with his hands. 20 years of anger crashed into him. 20 years of blaming Lydia for leaving. 20 years of believing she had stopped loving him. The preacher stood. She never stopped. Elijah looked up. Then why did she run? The preacher looked toward the road. A powerful family found out about the baby. Who? People who owned land. People who owned the sheriff. People who thought blood made them better than everyone else. Elijah felt sick. They wanted the child? They wanted the child dead. The little girl looked at the preacher. Mama told me that part. She told you? Yes. Were you afraid? All the time. The preacher nodded. Lydia came to me with the baby in her arms. She begged for help. Elijah whispered, Why didn't she come to me? The preacher looked ashamed. She wanted to. Then why? Because they were watching you. Elijah frowned. Watching me? If she stayed with you, they would have killed all 3 of you. Elijah looked at the girl again. She sat still. No tears, no anger, just quiet. She left to save you, the preacher said. Elijah sat down hard on the porch. He remembered the last fight with Lydia. He remembered shouting. He remembered accusing her of hiding things. He remembered her crying. Then she was gone. He had spent 20 years believing she chose to leave. The little girl stood and walked to him. Mama said you'd be stubborn. Elijah laughed once. It sounded broken.
She was right.
The girl sat beside him. She said you would blame yourself. Elijah looked away. She was right again. The preacher picked up the old tin box. There's something else. He opened it carefully. Under the empty space where the first letter had been hidden rested another folded paper. Elijah looked at the girl. Did you know? She nodded. She said not to open it until you knew the truth. Elijah reached for the letter. His hands shook worse than before. He unfolded the paper. Lydia's writing filled the page. His eyes stopped on one line. If she reaches you, trust her. Elijah read it again, then again. The little girl watched him. What did she say? Elijah could barely answer. She told me to trust you. The little girl smiled a little. Good. Elijah laughed and cried at the same time. She knew me too well. The preacher looked at the sky. She always did. Elijah folded the letter and held it against his chest. Did she suffer? The preacher nodded slowly. Yes. Did she ever stop running? No. Did she ever stop loving me? The old man shook his head. Never. The little girl looked at Elijah. Would you have stayed? Elijah turned toward her. Stayed where? With us. Elijah did not need time to think. I would have burned the world. The little girl looked down at her hands. I think she knew. Elijah felt tears run down his face. He had missed birthdays. He had missed scraped knees and stories before sleep. He had missed watching his little girl grow because he believed a lie. He reached for her hand. She let him hold it. Neither of them spoke. The preacher walked to the gate and looked down the road. His shoulders grew stiff. Elijah stood. What is it? The old man listened. The little girl listened too. Far away, a sound rolled across the fields. Hoofbeats, more than one horse, coming fast. The hoofbeats grew louder. Elijah stepped in front of the little girl and picked up his rifle. The preacher moved beside him. The bones still lay uncovered near the old well. Dust rolled across the road as a line of riders came through the gate. At the front rode the governor. His black coat looked too clean for the farm road. Beside him rode a gray-haired man and a sharp-faced woman dressed in dark clothes. More riders followed behind them. Elijah counted 8 guns. The governor looked around the yard. His eyes stopped on the bones. His face did not change. Elijah Cole. Elijah nodded once. Governor. The governor looked at the little girl. Hand her over. Elijah did not move. No. The governor sighed. Don't make this harder. No. The gray-haired man laughed. He thinks he has a choice. The little girl stepped around Elijah. You're afraid. The governor looked down at her. No, child, you are. I don't fear children. Then why did you bring so many men? The riders shifted in their saddles. The governor smiled, but his eyes stayed cold. She's proof, he said. Elijah frowned. Proof of what? Of mistakes. Elijah tightened his grip on the rifle. She has a name. She has a problem. The little girl looked at him. My mother had a name, too. The governor ignored her. He looked at Elijah instead. You know who I am. I know enough. Then you know I can make life easy. Elijah stayed quiet. The governor pointed toward the ranch. You keep your land. He pointed toward the fields. You get more. He looked at the house. New cattle, new horses, money. Elijah said nothing. You and the girl disappear. Nobody asks questions. Nobody gets hurt. Elijah looked at the little girl. She held the old tin box against her chest. He looked at the preacher. The old man slowly shook his head. The governor spread his hands. Freedom! Elijah took one step forward and spat into the dirt. The governor looked down at the spit. Then he smiled again. I hoped you'd be smarter. Elijah raised the rifle. I hoped you'd be better. The sharp-faced woman finally spoke. Governor, enough. The governor lifted one hand to stop her. No, they deserve the truth. Elijah stared at him. Talk. The governor looked at the bones by the well. Children disappeared. We know. Mothers disappeared. We know. Some families were too poor. Elijah felt anger rise inside him. Say it plain. The governor nodded. Strong families needed heirs. Weak families made too many mouths to feed. Children were moved. Elijah could hardly believe the words. Moved? Given better lives. The preacher stepped forward. You stole them. The governor looked at him. Careful, preacher. You stole them. The governor shrugged. Some lived. Elijah pointed toward the child bones. Some died. The governor looked away from the bones. There were accidents. Elijah almost pulled the trigger. The little girl touched his arm. She looked up at the governor. What was necessary about my mother? The governor opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The little girl waited. Answer me. The governor looked at the gray-haired man. The old man looked at the ground. The sharp-faced woman closed her eyes. The little girl asked again. What was necessary about my mother? Silence covered the yard. Elijah saw it then. They had answers for everything except Lydia. The governor finally looked back at the girl. She made trouble. By loving me? The governor said nothing. By running? Nothing. By wanting me alive? Nothing. Elijah looked at the governor with new eyes. The man who ruled half the valley could not answer one little girl. The governor's face hardened. This conversation is over. Elijah lifted the rifle. Not for me. The governor pointed at the child. Take her. 4 riders climbed off their horses. Elijah stepped forward. Try it. The preacher walked to Elijah's side. You'll go through me first. The governor looked surprised. Old man, move. No. The riders started forward. A voice shouted from the road, Hold it! Everyone turned. Farmers stood across the entrance to the ranch. Men and women, old and young. Some carried shovels. Some carried hunting rifles. Some carried nothing but courage. Elijah recognized faces from town. A widow whose son had vanished. A blacksmith whose sister disappeared years ago. A teacher who lost 2 cousins. They stood shoulder to shoulder across the road. The governor frowned. Move. Nobody moved. The widow stepped forward. No. The blacksmith raised his hammer. Not today. More people came from the fields. More wagons rolled into place. The road slowly filled. The governor looked at his riders. They looked uncertain. The preacher smiled for the first time. Looks like the truth travels fast. Elijah looked at the townspeople. Why are you here? The widow answered. We got tired of burying empty graves. The little girl looked at them. Thank you. The governor's smile vanished. You fools think this changes anything? The teacher answered. It changes enough. Elijah lowered his rifle a little. He was not alone anymore. The governor saw it too. He looked at the little girl one last time. His eyes had no kindness left in them. He climbed back onto his horse. This isn't finished. Elijah nodded. I know. The governor turned his horse toward the road. His riders followed. As they passed, he leaned toward the gray-haired man beside him. His voice was low, but Elijah heard every word. Kill the girl. The governor's words had barely faded when a rifle lifted from the line of riders. Elijah saw the barrel rise. He shoved the little girl behind him. The shot exploded across the yard. A wagon wheel shattered beside the gate. Panic erupted at once. Townspeople scattered for cover. Horses screamed and pulled against their reins. Elijah raised his rifle and fired back. One rider dropped from the saddle. Another shot answered. Wood splintered from the porch behind him. The governor's men charged. Get down, Elijah shouted. The little girl ducked beside the well. The preacher grabbed her shoulder and pulled her lower. More gunfire ripped through the ranch. The widow near the gate fired an old hunting rifle. The blacksmith swung his hammer at a rider who came too close. Dust and smoke filled the yard. The governor pointed forward. Take the girl. 3 riders broke away from the others and raced toward the well. Elijah fired. One horse stumbled. Another rider fell. The third kept coming. The little girl stood up and grabbed the broken sheriff's badge lying near the bones. She held it tightly against her chest. The rider reached for her. A gunshot cracked. The man flew backward from the saddle. Everyone turned. The sheriff stood near the gate holding a smoking revolver. For a second nobody moved. The governor stared at him. The sheriff looked at the little girl. Then he looked at Elijah. I was a coward. Elijah said nothing. The sheriff nodded. I know. Another rider fired at the sheriff. The sheriff fired back. The gunfight exploded again. The governor's men pushed through the gate. Townspeople met them head-on. The yard became chaos. Horses crashed into fences. Men wrestled in the dirt. Gunshots echoed across the fields. A flaming lantern flew from somewhere near the barn. Nobody saw who threw it. The glass shattered. Fire spread instantly across dry hay. The barn lit up. Orange light burst against the afternoon sky. The little girl looked toward the flames. "The records," the preacher shouted. Elijah frowned. "What records?" "The old storage room," the preacher pointed toward the burning barn. "They kept documents there." "What documents?" "Birth records, land records." "Names!" The preacher ran toward the fire. Elijah cursed and followed. The heat hit them before they reached the doors. Smoke rolled from broken windows. The little girl ran after them. "No!" Elijah grabbed her arm. "Stay back." The preacher disappeared inside. Elijah looked at the flames. Then he looked at the girl. Then he ran in too. The smoke blinded him. Heat wrapped around his body. The old storage room sat near the rear wall. He kicked the door open. Shelves filled the room, boxes, ledgers, folders, decades of secrets. The preacher was already dragging records toward the door. "Help me!" Elijah grabbed an armful. The ceiling cracked above them. They rushed outside. More townspeople joined them. Box after box came out. Names, dates, records people had spent years hiding. The little girl carried one small ledger against her chest. The broken badge never left her hand. A gunshot echoed nearby. Elijah turned. The sheriff stood between the girl and two riders. Blood covered his shirt. One rider aimed. The sheriff fired first. The man dropped. The second rider shot. The sheriff staggered. The little girl screamed. The sheriff looked down at the blood spreading across his chest. Then he looked at her. "Run!" She shook her head. The sheriff smiled sadly. "Good." Another shot rang out. The rider fell from his horse. The blacksmith had fired from behind a wagon. The sheriff dropped to one knee. Elijah ran to him. The sheriff grabbed his arm. "I knew." Elijah stared at him. "Knew what?" "About the children." Anger flashed through Elijah. The sheriff nodded. "I know. You helped them." "Yes." The sheriff coughed blood. Then he looked toward the little girl. "But not today." His eyes closed. His body fell into the dirt. The little girl stood frozen. The broken badge remained in her hand. The gunfight slowly faded. The governor looked around and realized the fight was turning against him. More townspeople were arriving from the road, more rifles, more witnesses. Too many. The governor cursed. "Fall back." His riders pulled away. Several were wounded. Some never got back on their horses. The governor turned his horse and rode toward the fields. Elijah lifted his rifle. The preacher grabbed the barrel. "No! We can't let him go." "Not like this." The governor disappeared into the distance. The fire still burned. The barn roof collapsed with a thunderous crash. Ash floated across the ranch. The fighting finally stopped. Silence replaced gunfire. Then pain hit Elijah. A burning ache spread through his side. He looked down. Blood soaked his shirt. The little girl saw it. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." It was not nothing. His knees almost gave out. The preacher helped him sit beside the well. The townspeople gathered the rescued records. One by one they opened the ledgers. Names filled every page. Mothers, children, birth dates, disappearances. Families separated by powerful men. The widow began crying. The teacher covered her mouth. The blacksmith stared at a page and whispered his sister's name. The truth was finally in the open. The little girl sat beside Elijah. The broken badge rested in her lap. He looked at it. "The sheriff died saving you." She nodded. "I know." Elijah pressed a hand against his wound. "You're safe now." The little girl looked toward the burning remains of the barn. "No." Elijah followed her gaze. The governor had escaped. She was right. Nothing was over. The preacher opened another ledger. His hands trembled. "We found them." Elijah looked up. "What?" "The mothers." Pages of names filled the book. Names that had been hidden for years. Names buried almost as deeply as the bones in the well. The townspeople gathered closer. Some cried. Some simply stared. The little girl held the badge tighter. The flames crackled behind them. Smoke drifted into the darkening sky. Elijah leaned back against the stone edge of the well. Exhaustion settled over him. The little girl moved closer and sat beside him. For the first time since arriving, her voice sounded small. Not brave, not hard, just small. She looked at him and asked, "Will you tell me about my mama?" Elijah looked at the little girl and tried to ignore the pain in his side. The fire behind them had almost burned itself out. Smoke drifted across the yard. The old records rested in neat piles near the well. The broken badge still lay in the girl's hands. She waited for an answer. "Will you tell me about my mama?" Elijah smiled through the ache. She laughed too much. The little girl smiled a little. "Really? All the time?" "What made her laugh? Me." The girl nodded. "I believe that." Elijah looked out across the fields. "The first time I met her, I fell off a horse." The girl covered her mouth. "You did not?" "I did." "And she laughed for 10 minutes. The little girl laughed too. Elijah had not heard that sound before. It made the yard feel different. "What else?" she asked. Elijah looked at the old house. "She was brave." "How?" "She stood up to people." "Bad people?" "The worst." The preacher walked over carrying one of the rescued ledgers. "That part is true." Elijah nodded. "She never let anybody push her around." The little girl looked down. "She stood up for me." Elijah looked at her. "I know. What else?" Elijah thought for a moment. "She was kind," the little girl smiled. "I know that too. If somebody was hungry, she fed them. If somebody was sad, she sat with them. If somebody was scared..." Elijah looked at the child. She stayed. The little girl held the broken badge against her chest. "I remember that." The preacher looked across the yard. "We should begin." Elijah stood slowly. The wound hurt, but he ignored it. "What do we do?" The preacher held up the old records. "We give people their families back." Word spread through the valley before noon. People came from every direction. Wagons rolled through the gate. Old men, young women, children, widows, brothers, sisters. Some carried shovels. Some carried flowers. Some carried nothing at all. Nobody laughed. The preacher stood beside the well. He opened the first ledger. His voice shook. "We found names." Silence covered the crowd. The preacher read the first one. A woman screamed. An old man dropped to his knees. The preacher read another. A young mother started crying. Another name. Another family stepped forward. The little girl stood beside Elijah. "So many." Elijah nodded. "So many." The townspeople spread across the fields. The preacher pointed toward places marked in the old records. Near the trees, behind the barn, beside the creek, shovels broke the ground. Nobody spoke much. The little girl walked beside Elijah. "What if they don't want to be found?" "They do." "How do you know?" "Because somebody finally came looking." The first grave opened before sunset. An old blanket covered small bones. A woman fell to the ground. "My baby." Nobody stopped her. The preacher closed the ledger. "He was taken 17 years ago." The woman touched the blanket. "I never stopped waiting." Another grave opened, then another. The valley filled with tears. The little girl bent down and picked a handful of wild flowers growing near the fence. She carried them to the first grave. Carefully she laid them down. Then she walked to the second. And the third. Elijah watched her. "What are you doing?" "They came home." Nobody answered. The words were enough. The preacher stood beside a fresh grave and opened another ledger. "We have more names." The crowd gathered again. Each name pulled another family from the shadows. A father found a daughter. A sister found a brother. An old woman found the place where her son had been hidden. The truth hurt. But it was better than not knowing. A rider came down the road. The blacksmith met him first. "What news?" The governor ran. Another rider arrived. He crossed the river. A third came. "People are hunting him." The crowd stayed quiet. Nobody cheered. Nobody smiled. Elijah looked at the little girl. "You hear that?" She nodded. "They won't stop." "No, good." The preacher kept reading. Hours passed. The sun dropped lower. The little girl stayed close to Elijah. She carried flowers until her hands were empty. Then she picked more. She never missed a grave. Elijah watched her carefully. Something bothered him. He thought about the first day at the gate. He thought about the letters, the well, the sheriff, the fire, the fight, the stories about Lydia. The little girl had asked about her mother again and again. Her laugh, her courage, but something was missing. He looked down at her. "You tired?" "A little." "You can rest?" "I'll rest later." Elijah smiled. "You sound like your mother." The girl smiled back. "I know." They walked past another fresh grave. The little girl placed more flowers. The preacher read another name. An old couple held each other and cried. Elijah looked at the child beside him. A strange thought settled into his mind. She had asked about Lydia. She had asked about the past. She had asked about the well. She had asked about the bones. She had never asked one thing, not once. He stopped walking. The little girl looked up. "What?" Elijah took a slow breath. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Who raised you?" The little girl looked toward the graves. "Nobody." Elijah frowned. "What do you mean?" "I stayed where I could, with families, for a little while. They fed you. Sometimes they cared for you." "Not really." Elijah felt cold. "Where did you sleep?" "In barns, in fields, in empty houses." The little girl looked down at the flowers in her hands. "When people learned my name, they told me to leave." Elijah could barely speak. "You were alone?" She nodded. "Most of the time." "What about your mother?" "She stayed as long as she could." "And after?" The little girl looked toward the setting sun. "I walked." Elijah felt his heart break all over again. "You crossed the valley alone?" "Yes." "You found food alone?" "Sometimes." "You found your way here?" "Yes, why?" The little girl looked at him as if the answer was simple. "Because Mama said you would never stop loving us." Elijah could not move. The flowers slipped from the little girl's hands onto the fresh earth below. The preacher called another name in the distance. Families cried. Shovels struck the ground. The wind carried the sound across the fields. Elijah looked at his daughter and realized she had crossed a hard and lonely world, carrying nothing but an old tin box, 2 letters, and faith in a father she had never met. His hands began to shake. Then Elijah started trembling. Elijah stood beside the fresh graves with his hands shaking. The little girl watched him quietly. Around them, families still gathered their lost children and carried old bones home. The preacher closed another ledger. The sun was dropping behind the hills, but Elijah could only see the child standing in front of him. He swallowed. "I need to ask again." The little girl nodded. "I know. Who raised you?" She looked at him for a long moment. "You already know." Elijah lowered his eyes. "No, yes, I want to hear it." The little girl held the old tin box against her chest. "Nobody." Elijah closed his eyes. "You walked alone?" "Yes." "You slept wherever you could?" "Yes, you had nobody to protect you." "I had Mama." Elijah looked up. "But she died." The little girl touched the tin box. "Not at first." The preacher stepped closer. "There is 1 letter left." Elijah looked at the box. "I thought we found them all." The little girl shook her head. "Mama said this one was for both of us." She opened the box. Hidden beneath the cloth lining rested another folded piece of paper. Elijah reached for it. His hand shook so badly the little girl helped him unfold it. Lydia's handwriting covered the page. Elijah started reading aloud. "If this letter is open, then the truth survived longer than I did." His voice broke. The little girl listened. "I had our daughter. I hid her because they wanted her dead." Elijah stopped. His tears blurred the words. The preacher touched his shoulder. "Keep going." Elijah nodded. "I trusted strangers because I could trust nobody else. Good people carried her. Bad people chased her. Some sold information for money, some hid her because they still believed in kindness." Elijah looked at the little girl. "You knew this?" She nodded. "Mama told me pieces." Elijah looked back at the letter. "If she reaches you, then she was stronger than I ever was. Take care of her. She belongs with her father." Elijah covered his face. The little girl stood quietly beside him. The preacher looked away to give them a little peace. Elijah lowered his hands. "You are my daughter. I know. You always knew. Mama told me. You never hated me?" The little girl frowned. "Why would I?" "I wasn't there. Mama said you didn't leave." Elijah looked at the sky. "I thought she abandoned me. I know. I was angry. I know. I was wrong." The little girl nodded. "I know that too." A shout came from the road. Riders, the blacksmith, ran toward them. They found him. Everyone turned. Dust rolled across the fields. A group of townspeople came riding back. A man sat tied across one horse. His hands were bound. His face was covered with blood and dirt. The governor, nobody cheered, nobody smiled. The riders pulled him down into the yard. The governor looked around. His eyes stopped on the open graves. Then the rescued records, then the little Elijah. Elijah walked toward him. "You ran," the governor laughed. "I almost made it." The preacher stepped forward. "You have nowhere left to hide." The governor looked at the crowd. "You think this changes anything?" The widow walked forward. "My son." The governor stayed silent. The blacksmith stepped beside her. "My sister." "Silence, another woman." "My baby." Silence. Elijah looked at the governor. "Tell them." The governor smiled. "No." Elijah grabbed his shirt. "Tell them." The governor looked around at the faces waiting for the truth. Finally he laughed. "We took children." A woman cried out, kept talking. "We locked mothers away." The preacher closed his eyes. "We sold babies to rich families." The crowd stood frozen. If mothers fought back, they disappeared. Elijah felt sick. The governor looked toward the graves. Some ended up there. The little girl stepped closer. "My mother?" The governor looked at her. She wouldn't stop running. "What did you do?" "We chased her." "What did you do?" "We caught her." The little girl did not move. "What did you do?" The governor looked away. Nobody spoke. Nobody had to. The truth had already answered. Elijah let go of the governor. His legs gave out. He dropped to his knees. 20 years. 20 years stolen. A daughter stolen. A family stolen. A future stolen. He started crying, not quietly, not proudly. He cried like a man who had lost everything and just found out he could have had it all. The little girl walked over. She stood in front of him, then she touched his shoulder. "Don't." Elijah looked up. "Why?" Her eyes filled with tears for the first time. "You still have me." Elijah reached for her. She hugged him. He held her tighter than he had ever held anyone. The crowd stayed silent. Even the governor looked away. The preacher wiped his eyes. The widow held her husband's hand. The blacksmith took off his hat. Nobody wanted to break the moment. Finally, the sheriff's old deputies stepped forward. One carried chains. They looked at the governor. "It is over." The governor laughed. "It will never be over." The deputy shook his head. "For you it is." The chains closed around the governor's wrists. He looked at Elijah. "You think you won?" Elijah stood. He looked at the graves, the rescued records, the townspeople, his daughter. Then he looked back at the governor. "No." The governor frowned. "I think the truth finally did." The deputies led the governor away. The crowd opened a path. Nobody touched him. Nobody spoke to him. Silence followed him down the road. The preacher picked up the old ledgers. Families slowly carried flowers toward the graves. The blacksmith covered the uncovered bones with clean blankets. The little girl stood beside Elijah. The sun slipped lower. The fighting was over. The lies were over. Only one thing remained. Elijah looked down at the child beside him. She had crossed lonely roads, survived strangers, carried Lydia's letters, brought the truth back to life. She looked up at him. He smiled through his tears. Then he asked the question he should have asked the day she stood at his gate. "What do I call you? What do I call you?" The little girl looked up at Elijah. The question hung between them while the last light of day settled over the old ranch. The governor had been taken away. The townspeople had returned to the graves. The preacher stood quietly near the well. The little girl smiled. "My name is Grace." Elijah whispered it. "Grace," she nodded. "My mama picked it." Elijah smiled through his tears. She picked the right one. Grace laughed. I think so. Days passed, but nobody left the ranch for long. The rescued records spread across the old house. The preacher and the schoolteacher worked together from sunrise until dark. Names found their families. Missing children found brothers and sisters. Lost land was returned to people who had been chased away years before. The governor sat in a locked cell under guard. The rich families who helped him lost their power. Some ran, some stayed, some faced the truth for the first time. The old sheriff's office stood empty. Nobody wanted the badge. The broken one stayed with Grace. Elijah healed slowly. The wound in his side closed. The wound in his heart took longer. Every morning he found Grace helping someone. She carried food to old women. She helped dig new graves. She carried fresh flowers to the children buried by the well. One morning, Elijah found her sitting beside Lydia's grave. You talked to her? Grace nodded. What do you say? I tell her what happened. What does she say back? Grace smiled. Nothing. That sounds lonely. No. Why not? Because I know she's listening. Elijah sat beside her. I missed everything. Grace looked at him. I know. I should have been there. I know. I can't fix that. Grace nodded. I know that too. Elijah laughed softly. You sound like your mama. Grace smiled. I hope so. Weeks passed. The ranch changed. The old well was closed with heavy stone. A fence was built around the graves. Each grave carried a name. No body would be forgotten again. One afternoon, the preacher walked toward Elijah. She told me something. What? She's leaving. Elijah frowned. No, the preacher nodded. You should talk to her. Elijah found Grace in the barn brushing an old horse. What are you doing? Getting ready. For what? She looked at him. To leave. Elijah felt cold. No. Grace put the brush down. I have to, you don't. I do. This is your home. I know. Stay. Grace looked at the horse. I can't. Elijah stepped closer. Why? Grace looked toward the road beyond the gate. There are other children. Elijah stayed quiet. They're still out there. I know. They don't know where they belong. I know. They're alone. Elijah looked away. Grace touched his arm. I was alone too. You aren't anymore. I know. Then stay. Grace smiled sadly. Mama didn't stop when people needed help. Elijah closed his eyes. No, I can't either. He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her she was too young, too small, too important. But he looked into her eyes and saw Lydia. He knew the answer before he spoke. When? Tomorrow. That night, neither of them slept much. The preacher packed food, the widow made blankets. The blacksmith fixed old horseshoes. The teacher wrote down names of families still searching for lost children. The whole valley came to help. Morning arrived quietly. Grace stood beside the gate where she had first appeared. Elijah carried a small bundle. He opened it. Inside rested Lydia's photograph. Grace looked at it. Elijah smiled. She laughed because I fell off a horse. Grace laughed too. I like it. Elijah handed her the picture. It belongs to you. Grace held it carefully. Then Elijah reached into his pocket. He pulled out the broken sheriff's badge. The old sheriff saved your life. Grace nodded. I know. He made mistakes. I know. He tried to fix one. Grace took the badge. I'll remember. Elijah walked to the barn. He led out, gently surprised. For me? For you? I've never had one. You do now. Grace looked at him. You trust me? Elijah smiled. I trust your mother. Grace laughed through her tears. I think she'd like that answer. The preacher hugged her first. The widow hugged her next. The blacksmith shook her hand. The teacher gave her another list of names. One by one, the people she had changed came to say goodbye. Finally, only Elijah and Grace stood by the gate. Neither of them spoke. The road waited. The horse stamped one hoof against the ground. Grace looked at Elijah. I spent my whole life wondering. Elijah nodded. So did I. Grace hugged him. He held her tightly, longer than he wanted to, not long enough. Finally, she stepped back. She climbed onto the horse. Elijah looked at her. You'll be careful. I will. You'll eat. I will. You'll sleep inside. Grace laughed. "I'll try." Elijah smiled. The smile faded quickly. "When will you come back?" Grace looked down the road. She stopped, then she turned toward him. Tears filled her eyes. "When I finish what Mama started." Elijah nodded. "I'll wait." Grace touched the photograph tucked safely inside her coat. She touched the broken badge. Then she turned the horse toward the road. Slowly she started riding away. The townspeople watched in silence. The preacher took off his hat. The widow cried softly. The blacksmith looked at the ground. Elijah stood at the gate. His hands rested on the old iron bars where Grace had first held them. The horse moved farther away. The road stretched ahead. Elijah found one last thing to say. "Grace." She stopped. She looked over her shoulder for the first time. For the only time, she smiled through her tears. "Goodbye, Papa." Then she rode on. The little girl who arrived carrying an old tin box now carried Lydia's photograph, the broken badge, and the names of forgotten children waiting to be found. She disappeared down the old road until the dust settled and the hills hid her from sight. Elijah did not chase after her. He did not call again. He stood at the gate and looked toward the empty road. 20 years earlier, he had waited for the dead to come home. He had buried hope with an empty coffin. He had believed love could be stolen forever. Now the graves had names. The children had stories. The truth had broken the powerful. His daughter was alive. She was carrying kindness where fear had once ruled. Elijah rested one hand on the iron gate and smiled at the quiet road ahead. For the first time in 20 years, he was not waiting for someone who would never return. He was waiting for someone who promised she would.